Lisa Weiss has broken her silence after years of leaking shocking secrets that could destroy Doug and Joanie Lamb's reputations. In this bombshell, long-buried secrets, betrayals, scandals, and lies are finally coming to light, shattering everything they've worked so hard to build. Lisa Weiss remained silent for years as her husband, Doug, became a well-respected Christian marriage counselor. He gave speeches, wrote books, and made TV appearances, advising couples on how to save their marriages. Doug was seen as an authority on topics like loyalty, faithfulness, and covenant love. Doug was widely regarded as a godly husband and an inspiration to many. However, behind closed doors, Lisa was living a life that contradicted his public persona. Despite this, Lisa stood by Doug's side for more than 30 years, believing in the mission they were constructing. She did everything from raising their children and managing the household to accompanying him on his journeys to discuss marriage despite the fact that it meant spending most of her time alone. She trusted him, believed in him, and worked to strengthen their marriage despite the fact that she began to feel invisible at home. Doug was constantly busy with his mission, but his growing public life meant that his needs and Lisa's connection as husband and wife began to recede. The hardest part wasn't she felt like a ghost, the unseen woman in the background of Doug's story, giving up pieces of herself so he could stand in the spotlight. It hurt deeply to watch him teach other people how to love their wives and fight for their marriages, but she loved being alone with him. She wondered if anyone else felt the same way. Would they believe her if she revealed the truth about what was going on behind the scenes? Doug was extraordinarily convincing, charming, and highly esteemed. Lisa spent a lot of time trying to shield their family's reputation, hoping and praying that things would improve. She thought that if she could only be more patient, supportive, and understanding, Doug would remember the dreams they had when they were young, but the distance between them only became wider. Lisa felt herself crumbling and losing touch with what it meant to be alive. She was losing more than just her husband. She was losing herself as well. In 2024, with the help of her friends and family, Lisa mustered the strength to speak out, and she did so, sharing her story, her anguish, and the reality of her life up to that point. Story of anger and clarity. She spoke quietly but with conviction, shattering the carefully constructed image Doug had constructed. Lisa revealed her history of hiding, her efforts to salvage a marriage that Doug wasn't willing to fight for, and the anguish of seeing him preach about faithfulness while he broke his own promises at home. "No, Joanie," she exclaimed. "Something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this, oh no." Then she defended Pete, who had hurt Pete so much. Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about that Pete. Now, Susie is a pathological liar, and she's made these false accusations. Claims were leveled against a kind chiropractor who has since passed away, but still has a record of assaulting her. I was taken aback by Joanie's words, so I pleaded with her, telling her, "Please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself." That would be the hope. Seeing that side of her, I can only say that it does not resemble the charming Joanie I saw on television. But I did catch a glimpse of that individual in the video when she mentioned that Jonathan has been involved in a smear campaign. I was confused because I hadn't seen Jonathan in that context. I knew he was in the scene when Lisa broke her silence to reclaim her voice, which was about seeking freedom, truth, and healing, not vengeance. Lisa had been hiding out for a long time, but after sharing her story, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. To show the world that women everywhere deserve to be seen, valued, and loved, not just in front of an audience, but also in the intimate moments spent with their families, where love can truly blossom. The Weisses' smiles, family photos, church events, and meticulously staged social media moments made Lisa and Doug appear to be the picture-perfect couple. Their marriage was admired, and their relationship was seen as a model of a godly partnership. However, when they were at home, away from the spotlight, things were slowly unraveling behind the scenes of cameras and conference stages. It wasn't like there was a sudden altercation or betrayal. Rather, it was the gradual, excruciating drift that occurs when a loved one grows emotionally distant, leaving you to grasp for a hand that no longer returns your embrace. At first, Lisa attempted to disregard it, as Doug had consistently been preoccupied with growing his counseling practice. She convinced herself that it was just a busy season, and that once things settled, he would return to her, and they would reconnect after speaking at churches and appearing on TV to talk about marriage and faithfulness. However, Doug's phone was always buzzing, and his mind was always somewhere else, planning the next sermon or book. Lisa would wait for him to return home, hoping that they could reconnect. At least for a few moments of connection, a genuine conversation, a look that said, "I see you." But instead, he would return home exhausted and preoccupied with his life outside their home. She would prepare dinner, sit across from him, and feel lonely at the table. At church, Doug would preach about the importance of pursuing one's spouse. He would speak about cherishing your wife, while Lisa felt like she was an afterthought in the life they built together. It was like living in two worlds, one where they were a strong united couple, and the other where she was slowly fading into the background. It was as if his words were meant for everyone else except her. Tried to express her feelings of isolation to him, but every time he nodded and said he understood, she would have to keep quiet and tell herself that she needed to be strong because supporting Doug's ministry meant putting her own needs on the back burner. She wanted to believe that she was helping others, but in reality, she was just taking on more and more work. Though they continued to work as a team and face challenges head-on, Lisa could feel the chasm widening between them. Doug wasn't being cruel or angry, but he also wasn't physically present, completely absorbed in his own world. Meanwhile, Lisa felt herself fading into oblivion, even though they still attended events together and received compliments. While listening to Doug express how fortunate Lisa was to be married to such a godly man, Lisa would nod and smile, suppressing tears as she wondered if anyone would ever see the truth she was bearing alone. The most difficult part was the confusion. Doug wasn't a villain, but rather a man who truly believed in helping others and dedicated himself to his work, but he somehow forgot about Lisa, who had been by his side through thick and thin. Lisa began to doubt her value and wonder if she was asking too much when she wanted her husband to love and notice her. She reflected on their early days together, when they shared hopes of starting a family, growing old together, and serving God. She remembered how they would spend hours upon hours planning their future together, laughing and sharing dreams. Long nights when Doug was gone or emotionally miles away, Lisa would look at the man sleeping next to her and wonder when he had stopped seeing her or choosing her. As the days turned into years, Lisa felt herself becoming a shadow in her own life, taking care of the kids while holding on to those memories of promising to always put each other first, manage the household and provide support for Doug's expanding ministry, all the while feeling like she was vanishing. She sought solace in church activities, friendships, and child care, but the pain of being overlooked by the one person who mattered most never went away. Occasionally, Lisa would attempt to reawaken the spark by organizing date nights, writing him notes, and discussing their relationship. Once again, Doug would agree, but his thoughts were constantly elsewhere. He would check his work email during dinner, talk about their rare evenings together, and take calls. Lisa started to realize that she was competing with Doug's mission, and she was losing the battle. The emotional neglect turned into deep loneliness, the kind that makes. Lisa questioned her sanity, wondering if she was being unreasonable, selfish, or if this was the reality of marriage after decades of being together. However, She knew in her heart that love shouldn't feel like being alone in a crowded room or like she had to constantly beg for attention from the man she loved. He prayed, hoping that God would repair what was broken in the hopes that Doug would reunite with her, hoping for a miracle that would reunite their love. However, instead of a miracle, the distance between them grew, and it became apparent that their marriage was crumbling due to Doug's ambition and Lisa's unspoken pain. What's worse is that no one else noticed. To onlookers, they appeared to be the ideal couple. Lisa, who appeared to be perfectly content in photos and at Doug's events, would sit quietly and applaud when others did the same. However, her heart was breaking, and she would remain silent for fear of damaging Doug's reputation, speaking the truth, or continuing to pretend everything was fine behind closed doors. The breakdown was gradual but steady, and it was due to the conversations that had been missed. A lack of affection and emotional distance that was more noticeable than any physical altercation. Doug's distant gaze told her he was thinking about someone else, even though he was standing right in front of her. Lisa gradually came to terms with the fact that she had lost herself in her efforts to support a man who had stopped seeing her a long time before the divorce, even though the marriage had been over for years. Lisa denied it, but she had battled for them, prayed for them, and believed in them, but she couldn't save a marriage on her own. The breakup wasn't due to a single defining moment, but rather to the accumulation of countless smaller ones that eroded the love they once shared, leaving Lisa to face the quiet loneliness of an apparently perfect life. Lisa Weiss felt as if the wind had been ripped out of her sails when she learned that Doug had remarried. It wasn't simply that he had moved on. It was the rapidity with which it had transpired that shocked her. After years of remaining silent in a marriage that had already died a long time ago, Lisa was left to pick up the pieces and rediscover herself without Doug. Doug's remarriage to Joanie Lamb was a shocking but well-polished headline. Joanie was a well-known Christian television personality, and it happened just months after their divorce papers were signed. It was as if everything they had built together had been a chapter that he could simply close and walk away from the world. Their wedding photos depicted happy faces, a joyful ceremony, and social media captions about God's timing and new beginnings. However, for Lisa, those images were like knives slicing through her as she sat alone trying to understand how her marriage had transformed from a marriage counselor's lifelong focus on teaching others about faithfulness and commitment into a power couple in Christian circles. Everything came crashing down in a flash for Lisa. She had devoted decades to raising their family and supporting Doug in his calling as a speaker on marriage sanctity, who encouraged couples to fight for each other and never give up. Lisa believed what he said, lived it, and built her life around it. So when Doug moved on, her world came crashing down. In such a short amount of time, losing him was betrayal enough. His remarriage to Joanie, whom Lisa had known for years, the two had traveled in the same Christian circles, attending events together, sharing ministry spaces, and betraying all that he had preached, represented, and worked to support. Crossing paths in the Christian media world, Lisa never imagined that the woman who was once just another face at conferences would become her life partner. However, as is customary, rumors began to circulate about whether Doug and Joanie had been emotionally connected before the divorce was finalized. Lisa refused to believe it and wanted to move on with her life. It was hard for her to believe, but the timeline was too clean and the questions were too numerous to sleep at night. Had they been talking while Lisa was still fighting to save her marriage? Had the seeds of this new relationship been planted during her time of prayer for healing from the broken home, which was caused by more than just the publicity surrounding the wedding? The story was lauded by members of their community as a testament to God's handiwork, all the while Lisa struggled to regain her strength and identity. Friends who had prayed with her and Doug were now congratulating him, and Joanie posted blessings online as if Lisa had never existed. Lisa felt invisible, as if her decades of devotion and everyone had forgotten about love. Lisa sat alone in her living room, looking at pictures of Doug and Joanie smiling and celebrating with loved ones. She tried to explain to her kids why their world was changing so quickly. Lisa watched as Doug and Joanie shared their story on television. While her story was presented as a touching testament to God's timing, Lisa's pain went unspoken and unacknowledged. What truly wounded Lisa, though, was Doug's hypocrisy. He had spent years counseling couples, encouraging them to stay committed, be patient, honor their vows, and work hard even when the going got tough. However, when it came to his own marriage, he had abandoned them and moved on to someone else in record time, leaving Lisa to cope with the emotional aftermath as he entered a new life without looking back. Lisa's pain extended beyond the loss of Doug. It encompassed the loss of the future she thought they were creating together. It was excruciating to witness the man she loved transform into someone she didn't recognize, someone who could openly celebrate a new love, as she was abandoned. Mourning the end of a life they had vowed to live together, it was about feeling left out, replaced, and silenced in a narrative that had once encompassed her. Reliving the years they had spent together, the dreams they had shared, the vows they had made, and the prayers they had uttered for their family, she doubted that any of it had been genuine for him. The remarry was more than just a headline for Lisa. It was a constant reminder that her life had changed irrevocably. She had to watch as Doug and Joanie built a platform together, receiving attention and praise for their new union, while she was left behind. The questions were endless, but the answers never came. Lisa needed time alone to heal, away from the cameras and the congratulations. It felt like her life, sacrifices, and love were just a footnote in Doug's story. But in those moments of quiet when the tears would fall, she began to realize something powerful. Doug's choices didn't define her worth, and the speed of his marriage didn't erase the. Doug and Joanie could move on and share their story, but Lisa still had a story to tell, a story of faith, resilience, and standing strong when everyone else seems to have forgotten you. Lisa started to realize this during Doug and Joanie's marriage, which was a challenging but ultimately rewarding experience. Shook up the world, but it also set her free. She was finally able to let go of the illusion she'd been clinging to, and she could see that her healing and future were in her own hands. She could mourn her losses while entering a new chapter, one where her story was heard, and she wasn't confined to anyone else's shadow. Finally, the shocking marriage. Joanie Lamb was not the last chapter in Lisa's story. Rather, it was the searing turning point that drove her to rediscover who she was, to take back her identity, and to start living a life where she wasn't a shadow for anyone else. It was the moment that taught her that there is hope for a better future, even in the darkest times, and that even in betrayal, there is a chance to be whole again. A fresh start. As news of Doug and Joanie's marriage spread, Lisa felt as though everyone was looking at her life through a microscope. Soon, there were posts everywhere, praising the marriage, congratulating the couple, and even strangers online referring to it as a testimony, as if they didn't know any better. Behind closed doors, Lisa was experiencing a sea of sorrow and bewilderment. The loss of her husband wasn't the only tragedy. She was also losing her role in the life she had worked so hard to create. For decades, she had been Doug's ministry partner, a quiet supporter who helped him establish his platform, raise their children, and keep the home together as he spoke and traveled. In the midst of all this public celebration of their marriage, Lisa found it increasingly difficult to grieve in private. It seemed like everywhere she turned, there were reminders of how swiftly Doug had moved on, with someone who was already well known in their circles. All the while, her own world seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. Despite the public celebration of Doug and Joanie's marriage, which Lisa perceived as a betrayal, the people who had prayed with her and Doug now congratulated him on what seemed like a perfect blessing from God. Lisa was left to clean up the emotional wreckage in silence, as if her pain had been erased from the story. While Lisa fought for the will to face each day, her online friends, who she had hoped would be there for her in this darkest hour, remained silent out of fear of taking sides. In the background, members of her church hushed their conversations in an effort to understand what had transpired. Feeling overwhelmed by her grief, Lisa would spend her late nights scrolling through her phone, reading comments and posts. She couldn't comprehend how the man who had preached about fighting for marriage could start a new one so fast. This made her question her beliefs about love, faith, and commitment. Lisa felt invisible, small, and profoundly alone, as if her very identity had been associated with being Doug's wife, and now that he was gone, she had no idea who she was. Lisa had the most difficult time trying to protect their children from the sudden upheaval, but they were old enough to understand the news and social media posts, and they could feel their father's confusion as he moved on. It broke Lisa's heart to see her children in pain, feeling abandoned and trying to make sense of a world that felt so unstable. For a while, Lisa didn't know how to move forward. She felt stuck, frozen in a moment she couldn't change, haunted by the questions. Why did Dad leave? And, is he with someone else already? Lisa began to rediscover herself in the quiet moments, taking small steps like going for walks and journaling, as she longed for the man she once loved, the dreams they had shared, and the family moments that had felt so secure. There were days when she felt like never getting out of bed, burdened by the weight of betrayal and public shame. While she couldn't change what had happened to her, she could choose how she would live her life going forward, and through her prayers, she came to realize that her worth was not defined by Doug's actions, and that his public narrative couldn't erase the truth of what she had.